Welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. We're doing a live show today, so I hope everyone is tuned in. If not, that's all right. You can always see us later after it's all recorded and up on Rumble, Clout Hub, Bitchute, and this one will be up on YouTube as well. And I just want to welcome everybody here. For those of you who've never been to this show before, seen our show, I'm Catherine Camp, and I'm the hostess for the show, as I mentioned. And this is where we dig into difficult topics of our day. And we do this so that we can learn about what is really going on. We look beyond the physical into the spiritual realm, because really the spiritual realm is much more active than what we see here on earth and in the physical. And I think what we see here in the physical is already too much for many to handle. So the physical and the spiritual are all meshed together. Anyhow, today that's our topic. We're going to look into Halloween and what really is going on behind the scenes, and how we've tended to cover things up with candy and costumes and just kind of ignoring what's happening really in the spiritual realm, and how some people practice and celebrate this day. And it's really the Day of the Dead, or the Night of the Dead. We have Dr. Gregory Reid with us today, and he's a returning guest, and I'm always delighted when he can carve out time to join us. But we're going to learn today so that we can have those conversations in our culture, conversations that count, and conversations with an eternal perspective. So I want to get Greg out here and welcome you back. Hi, Greg. Thank you so much.
You.
This is an incredible topic that I don't know very much about, because I've always been your basic Christian who sees what's going on and, let their children put on costumes. I did as a child. But since I've been doing research in the spiritual realm and what's really going on, it has become repulsive to me. And I know this is an area that you have dealt with for a long time, with deliverance, with evil. And I think we need to have those conversations with friends and family, and make decisions based on reality and what's happening. So you can start to fill us in, and I don't know where you want to start. Like, how did, where did Halloween really start with? And then let's go maybe a little historical and then get up to speed on the spiritual realm.
Yes, well, it's one of the more ancient holidays that's celebrated in the pagan culture. And some believe that it began with the Druids, which tends, my research tends to lean towards that. And Halloween, also known as Samhain, or Samhain, is the day they believe that the dead rise up, and the Lord of the Dead, Samhain, comes back from the dead, and he roams around the earth for that night. And he roams around seeking whatever he does, but he brings all of the dead with him, and the dead roam through the land seeking to take people over, to possess people. Mm-hmm. And in order to avoid that, the pagan culture, the people would put on animal masks in order to ward off those spirits from thinking that they were human. And they had a thing, they would carve ugly faces in pumpkins or gourds to ward off the evil. And then they would have different things where they would, if they came to your door, you gave the Druid priest what he wanted, or something really bad would happen to you. So it's a trick or treat. It's actually treat them, or you're going to get something bad. You're going to be tricked. And the other different ceremonies that we take is just kind of fun, like bobbing for apples was actually a ceremony of divination to find out which young person was going to marry which young person. So that's kind of how it developed into, that was and it was a night where sacrifices took place, animal and human sacrifices. And that took place around something was called we call it a bonfire, which is very popular on Halloween. They call
Mm-hmm.
it bonfire.
A
And
what? Bomb?
bonfire, as in the
Can you
human
spell that?
bone, Bone, like
Oh.
bonfire.
Mm.
Yeah. So every aspect that we celebrate as Halloween is pretty much has a dark and definitely non-Christian roots, if not evil roots.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny you would bring that up because well, I was just the last book before I in Ezra now, but before that it was in Amos, and God condemns Israel for hanging out with other cultures that burn even the bones, and so it's a sin, really. And God looks at it as a grave sin, and I guess that is because, and you can clarify for us, that was a form of idolatry. That was a form of sacrificing to other gods.
Absolutely. And that was
Okay.
something that was not just the Druids, but, all the way through the biblical times. That's why God condemned those who passed their children through the fire. That was literally what it meant, is they would take particularly their newborn male child, and put them in the white hot arms of the god Baal or Moloch, and burn them to death while they were having a family and a cultural, citywide orgy. They would have to do that above the screams of their child that was being cremated. It's horrible, but these things, that's what the paganism had led to,
Mm.
because the gods demanded supposedly these kind of sacrifices. And it's one thing, I think, to think about it in terms of, well, yeah, but we don't do that stuff anymore. Well, good for us. But people won't realize it's still being done. Children are still being sacrificed, and takes place on Halloween. There's 4 dates that are crucial to the occult world, to those who practice real. I'm talking about real Satanism, not the fun, showy stuff that they're doing with, the Temple of Satan or whatever it's called. I'm talking about
Mhm.
real ones, and that's Halloween, April 30th, and the two the fall and summer, fall equinox, winter, the solstices and the
Okay.
equinoxes. Those 4 dates, and Halloween and Christmas, are the most important days to uh, the occult culture, to those who really practice demonic sacrifices.
What happens on Christmas? Because I know that that's just a cover up for the solstice, the winter solstice,
And
which doesn't even land always on the 25th.
right, but
So,
the solstice always ends on the 21st, I believe. And
yes.
that's the celebration of the, one God dying and the other one being raised from the dead. So it's the same thing. It's the same process of death and rebirth, which are practiced by not just general occult cultures, but particularly those who are involved in the satanic realm. Those concepts are very important. So it's very easy for them to blend. And the other date, of course, is Easter, because they're able to blend the Christian idea of death and resurrection
Hmm.
with a similar some satanic rituals of someone dying and bringing them back from the dead, which involves, there's different rituals that they do. One in which they actually, this is awful, but they actually place a person in a coffin and bury them with an air hole so they can breathe for a short period of time, and then they bring them out in a ceremony that's a mockery of the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. There are groups of people who do this?
Yes, a lot of the hardcore black magic groups, these are old ceremonies. Anything that's a mockery of Christianity, they will make part of what they do. A lot of this began, although the worship of pagan gods has always been there, and whatever mask Satan wants to put on, we know who's behind the mask.
Hmm.
So it may be pagan cultures like Moloch, which turns out, the abortion industry is simply a sanitized version of sacrifices to the god Moloch. And it's amazing to me at this age that the new satanic churches actually have created sacrificial ceremonies for abortion clinics where the mother can recite this ritual while they're sacrificing their own infant, which finally got me to the point where, well, great, you guys finally admitted what you've been lying about for years. You have always said, we don't do human sacrifices. Thank you for finally admitting the truth, is in fact you do, and you're using the abortion industry to do that. So we go back to the ceremonies that they do. A lot of this mutated and became a mockery of the Christian church as a result of the Crusades. And when the Knights Templar were sent, I believe, to Jerusalem to fight the war for the Pope. And then the Pope betrayed them, turned his back on them. And as a result, a lot of the priests turned to black magic, turned to darkness, and developed what was called the Black Mass, which was where they would take all the elements of the Christian or the Catholic Mass, reverse it, and by night, usually between 12 and 3 o'clock in the morning, would do those ceremonies where they would put the cross upside down, and instead of a lamb, they would have a goat head, and then they would take the Mass, say the Lord's Prayer backwards, and they would take the elements of communion and use blasphemous elements and consume those. And so that became the foundation of modern Satanism in the 1930s and 40s. The black magician Aleister Crowley developed that spells and rituals. Later, the Anton Szandor LaVey of the Church of Satan developed that and turned that into the Satanic Bible and the Church of Satan. So it developed out of that. So you've got two groups going on. You've got what I call the wannabe Satanists who just think it's fun, and they say, we don't really worship the devil, we worship ourselves. I'm like, well, you're just a player then. You don't know what's really behind it, because for centuries, there's been this other element that takes every element of the Christian faith and does blasphemous rituals and bloodletting on days like Halloween, on days like Christmas, on days like Easter. And survivors, like myself, of ritual abuse these days are monstrous. I'm glad I'm actually going to be en route to Florida this Halloween, because it'll get me to be able to distract myself, because my memories of Halloween are not happy ones. And survivors, they have a hard time with Christmas, and you probably have a hard time inviting them to church for Easter.
Wow. So that's right. For those of you who have not watched Greg Reid on our show, gosh, Dr. Reid, you've been so generous with your time. I think you've been coming back, I guess we can go back 3 years now, and just look him up. And yes, Dr. Reid was a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, and those are not, so he's speaking firsthand. He's not just speaking theoretically. So can you tell us where people, we never know who's watching, and maybe they need to look some things up. Where is the best place for people to find out about some of the things that you mentioned?
Well, you can go to my website, it's www.gregoryreid.com, and I have numerous articles about these subjects. There's numerous books that have been written. My own story is called Nobody's Angel, and I wrote really the raw details of what I went through in my recovery. And here's my shameless plug for the show. I just finished this monster.
Oh.
And this is the product of, I think, probably 35 years of work in investigating satanic crime and satanic rituals, going after criminal Satanists and pedophile groups, and there was a need to do that at some point because the whole narrative had been rewritten to say there's no such thing as satanic crime. It's all satanic panic. It's all village folklore. None of this stuff ever happened. Children weren't abused. So go back to your happy lives and don't worry. And after 35 years, I just thought that is enough. We've got to tell the truth about these things.
Mm.
And so that's what I did in that book. It's 550 pages.
Wow.
And I felt like if I never am able to do anything else in terms of helping survivors and helping those that help them, then I've been able to do that, hopefully.
That's incredible. And yes, Dr. Reid has really some very helpful books, War of the Ages, The Trojan Church, and others. And those are books that if you are dealing with a friend or a family member that could possibly be oppressed by evil spirits, you can start reading in there and maybe understand a little bit better instead of just thinking that they hate you or they are just off their rocker, just unpleasant to be around. You might be able to understand them a little bit better on a spiritual level, like what is going on here? There's something that we can't see, that they don't even know it's happening. So you can maybe help somebody that you love by reading some of these books. Wow, that must go ahead.
Well, thank you. I think it's helpful that we have at least a base understanding of, things are not exactly the way that we think they are for a lot of people. And the world right now, I mean, we've all been absolutely mortified by everything that we've learned about human trafficking and the things that we don't know. Over 350 children, or is it 350,000?
350,000 children. It's either
Yes.
325 or 350.
Yeah, 325, I think is
It
correct.
could be more because that's
Gone.
what they know about.
And where are they? Well, I know where they are. I know they've been absorbed into this huge multi-billion-dollar network that is not just involved in child pornography, but is also part of the satanic world. They can trade children back and forth, and it makes it part of their financial empire. And the thing that's hard for people to hear, and I'm going to be very careful how I coach this, how I put this, because it's so sensitive. One of the biggest trends on the internet for the last few years has been infant rape. And I can't even wrap my head around that. I mean, I just see red when I even think about that.
Mm.
But think about this. A child's memory development, doesn't really even start to kick in very much for the first year. So if these things are happening to these children and they survive, all they're going to know as they grow up is they are in constant agonizing pain and they have no idea what to do with it or even where it came from because they don't have the memory to remember it. And I think, while we're out celebrating Halloween and, having fun with the world and stuff, there are people like that are desperately in need of knowing a savior who can heal them without knowing all those details. They don't have to go through all the agony. They're already there, but we serve a God who can heal them. But if we don't acknowledge it, how are we going to help them?
It's the acknowledging part that I hope that people will glean from our conversation today, because I know churches have tried to turn to something somewhat of a trunk or treat to bring people in, and but we also we're not touching on, and it does, their festivals of trunk or treat. Others do harvest festivals to divert people from the actual going out on Halloween and dressing up like monsters. If you really knew how many evil spirits there are around, you would have no desire to dress up. And I understand that, maybe jumping around, but watching a movie like Eyes Wide Shut, um, do people dress in these horrific costumes to perform these things on children?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of my
Oh,
earliest memories was a ceremony in
mm,
which everybody was dressed in an animal mask. Everybody.
oh,
And going around, dancing around a circle and reciting one of the old languages that they use. And yeah, so that's part of it. I wasn't surprised when I saw, I think it was Prince Charles's, I want to say it was his 25th birthday. It may have been a little bit older, where it was a
mhm,
big party and everybody who attended was in animal masks. So when I saw eyes wide shut, I thought
mhm,
that's real. And then one of the movies that shocked me a great deal, and I'm hard to shock, is a couple of years ago they came out with a movie called Midsummer, and it was about a girl who did not know that she was from a Druid family, and she ended up going to a retreat, a summer retreat with some of her friends, and all of it was a summer solstice ceremony and festival, and I'm watching them put to film things that I experienced on the winter solstice, 1964. I'm
mm,
watching the dress, I'm watching the rituals, I'm watching the symbols, all of that. I mean, it was a little bit traumatic for me to watch because I've talked about it for years. I can
mm,
draw you very vivid pictures of everything they did. And
mm.
here they are committing it to film. But that's how they normalized their world to the outside world.
Yes.
And that's why Halloween for me, I don't get mad or condemn Christians who do this. I have an article on my website called The Halloween Compromise, and that was pretty much my John, crying in the wilderness and yelling at everybody about it. But the way I look at it now is I don't get mad at people. But for as far as Halloween, as we say in East Texas, you can put pig on a lipstick and it's still a pig.
Yeah,
Right?
lipstick on a pig. I
Yeah.
know what you mean. I thought about that the other day with some of the political things going on today. I was like, well, you can put that lipstick on a pig and it's still a
Right. It's
pig.
still a pig.
Yeah.
And I take it a little further with people. I say, you may think it's extreme, but think about this. Would you, if somebody decided to create a holiday to celebrate Hitler's birth, would you participate in that? Well, no, absolutely not.
Right.
Well, what if you called it something else? What if you called it, the great April 21st, Happy Day, and you could dress up your kids in little, Hitler outfits or something? He said, no, we don't want anything to do with that. I said, well, why are you participating in darkness? I mean,
Mm.
if churches want to do trunk or treat, I mean, I have a theory that the reason Christians don't want to abandon Halloween is because they still want candy. And they don't want to admit the fact that they just need to grow up and stop it. Go get candy at the store another day, do something, but don't try and justify something that is rooted in evil. And every believer has to decide this for themselves. But at some point, how seriously do we take the word in Ephesians that says, have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them? So when Christians say, well, what do you expect us to do on Halloween? I said, well, do something different. I've got an idea. Why don't you have a worship night and have somebody come in and share their testimony about coming out of the occult? If,
Oh, wow.
if churches did that, can you imagine the kind of people we could bring into the kingdom?
There would be so much spiritual warfare on top of what's already going on, but it would be kind of exciting
It
to
would be.
see,
Yeah, I'd
because
love to see it happen.
if you know what's going on and you know to expect the enemy, you can laugh at him and say,
Right.
"You're not going to get away with this. Get out of here." So it
Yeah.
can get a little exciting, but not scary if you have the power of God living inside of you.
Well, and that's the key right there, because when I was a youth pastor, we used to take the kids out to do street evangelism, and they're like, "Aren't you afraid what the kids are going to be exposed to?" I said, "Throw them in the shark tank. They'll learn to swim. If they know that Jesus Christ is living inside of them, they'll be just fine." Or you can have them sit outside the shark tank and watch everybody else get eaten up by the sharks and do nothing.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be in the midst of the battle.
We are. And I love that you're saying that, because many churches want to pander to, babies, and that's where they keep their congregations at that level. And then you have a few worker bees, and then you have mostly the ones who come in who don't ever grow, who never speak up. Someone this weekend told me she's in a group where they get excited because they do share their testimonies or share with somebody, which is very unusual as far as I'm concerned. I've not seen too much of that. And I'm encouraging. I want people to get out there more.
Absolutely. And I think the shocking thing, I may be wrong, but I think if you went into your average church and said, "Give your testimonies," I think about 90% of them would say, "I don't have one." Because you nail it down. It's like, "Well, when did you meet Jesus?" "I don't know. I've kind of always just been a Christian." Wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
If you've met Jesus. I mean,
Yeah.
some people do grow up in the faith and that continue that, but most people, there's a moment where your life changes forever. And so it's hard for people to share a testimony if they don't have a testimony. And this is the reason I'm not invited back to speak at churches more than about one time.
I hear you. Who did I tell recently? I said, it's just where God has me. I am a watchman, and I have to tell it like it is, or those people's blood will be on my hands if I don't speak up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Otherwise, I give them the facts, lay it out. And my homiletics professor in seminary for my D-Min said one day, you're not going to get asked back to many churches preaching like that.
Yeah.
But I don't work in a church, so it
Well, there
doesn't
you go.
matter.
I worked at a church for 7 years, and I was in the church for 15. And thank God for the pastor that was willing to make an uncomfortable compromise with somebody like me, because I'm definitely square peg in a round hole material.
Mm-hmm.
But because of his brave heart in that, I was able to conduct an entire series for a year every Sunday on spiritual warfare at this little tiny Lutheran church. And, they packed it out every Sunday morning. And so people can handle more than we think. Kids
Yes.
can handle more than we think. And I'm just realizing, especially in the light of the upcoming election and some of the things we may be facing. I mean, I was watching something this morning where Will Ferrell, the comedian, who I kind of liked in the movie Elf, I thought it was cute, but now he was doing a program the other night on some comedian show where they were mocking Lee Greenwood's song about America. And it was all a mockery of Christianity. They did their own version, talked
Mm-hmm.
about Bible thumping Christians, and that's the real problem. And like, we need to wake up and realize we're living in a hostile world, and we need to at least be able to understand the basics of spiritual warfare. This is a war, and it always has been for the church. And it's time for us to stop living in Disneyland and face the facts of who we are and what we're called to do.
It's true. Well, Greg, I'm looking at the comments here, and we have one from someone who knows you.
Yes.
Do you know Zach Nichols?
Very well.
Okay. He asks here, are the children basically bought off each of these Satanists or pedophiles as sex slaves? And could they literally be children who are not part of the bloodlines, just missing children?
That's a good question. And the answer is both. There are children who are raised in this and they know what their job is in terms of operating in pedophile groups or even stealing other children. I mean, I was a product of one of the young people in my church when I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10, befriending me and bringing me in. And he was 11 or 12, I think, at the time. And
Mhm.
he was used as a lure to bring me in. So there are people within that aspect of these groups that's what they do. As a matter of fact, something I think is important for people to know with a lot of the child trafficking groups right now, they're actually using some of their older or teenage female members that are part of the trafficking ring, and they Google youth groups, and then they have the youth groups, they will send this person into the youth group to begin to recruit and see if they can find some young ladies that they can pull into the network. So we need to be very careful
Oh
of the people who
my.
are coming into our youth group and make
Yes.
sure you know your sheep and you're watching out for them. So there are those that are within these networks that's their job. And my friend Mark, his job was to recruit me. He probably had recruited a few others, I don't know, but to recruit me and then bring me eventually to a ceremony where unknowingly to him, his life would be extinguished on the
Oh,
solstice of 1964, having me participate in that sacrifice so that I would carry the guilt and the shame.
oh,
Having said that, there are also, I think, a great number of the victims within the satanic world and the child trading and the child pornography world are teenagers who have run away or have been taken, because in law enforcement, if a teenager's like 13 or 14, around that age, they are they're taken off of the rolls. I mean, you can't even look for them for like 24 hours. The
mm,
police wait 24 hours to see if they come back, and by that time it's usually too late. But after that, they go on the missing child roll,
mhm.
and the police everybody stops looking for them at that point. And so their lives are basically over at that point. And there's a huge amount of missing teenagers that I think have become part of this group. And Zach's asking, so it's possible to get some of the children back. I believe it is, but a lot of that's going to depend on how we approach these things as a church and as a culture, as the church being in the world. How do we interact with the world around us? Because I mean, you think about it, 350 to 325,000 children missing. They're not all locked in cages somewhere.
Oh
They're out
no.
exposed to the public. And I think I don't exactly know what the sign is. I think it's something like this, that if a child
Wait,
does this,
there you go. Okay.
I believe it's this, it's a signal that help, I'm being trafficked.
Oh,
So somebody's being trafficked and they're watching this. If you do something like this, there's a lot of us that are aware. That means help me, I'm being trafficked. And hopefully someone will be able to intervene, because these people are cowards. They're murderous, but they're also cowards. And if you stop somebody in the midst and grab that child and say, I'm calling the police right now, that trafficker usually will just take off. So
yeah,
it is.
they don't want to be found out because this isn't their first offense, most likely.
Right. And they have their organization, like everything else. It's like an army. And I started to realize, because I'm very grateful, and I've got friends. I've got some friends in Missouri that have they're starting a home for girls that have been trafficked. It's called KCMinistries. And I'm thankful because people finally are waking up and they're going and getting out a lot of these young girls who are being trafficked into prostitution rings. I'm extremely grateful for that. However, having said that, I'm also aware of the fact that to the groups that are doing this, that are trafficking in human flesh, that are destroying young people's lives, this is considered acceptable business loss, that they'll let that some of their lower level kids that are being prostituted, they'll let them be rescued as long as the authorities don't get up to the next level and find out who's really running the show. Because one of the things that's probably gotten me in the most trouble, and it has also been the most painful thing, is to realize These things go all the way up into the halls of Congress. These things go into the highest levels of society.
And yes, and I think that's why there's such a battle right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to keep out people who are going to do something about it. And
I'm not a political creature.
nope.
But I realize as a believer, I have to know who I am. As a line from one movie I love says, we have to decide, the time is now, we have to decide who we are. And when we do that, you look at this election, you say, okay, there's stuff I don't like on both sides, but how can I, in any good conscience, vote for somebody that stands absolutely against everything that the Word of God lifts up as righteous and holy? And if you're a believer
Literally everything.
and you can't make that decision, then I'm sorry for you, but you need to get your heart right. That's just it.
Yeah. And what will I tell you? You're participating in the wickedness and helping it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I did want to touch on let's see, if Halloween, these horrible things go on, and I don't know much about, is this the same group as these masks, these horrible animal masks and these ceremonies that they do? Is this the same as Luciferianism, or is that different?
It's a good question. There are levels to this, and just starting with the very basic, you have your basic occult world, kind of low level stuff like Ouija boards and seances and spirits and whatever. Then you get sort of into the New Age, which is a little broader, that believes in calling on the ascended masters, and that we blend everything together. And then it goes into lower level satanic groups, which are groups like independent groups and kids who get involved in Satanism. And then the ones from the Church of Satan level, which they claim they don't commit crimes, good for them, but they're people that join from that level. But above all that is what is called the Luciferians. And they're the ones that are most committed, and their religion, so to speak, which really started in some ways with theosophy under a woman named Madame Blavatsky back in the late 1800s, I believe. And she developed a thing called theosophy. And she did a magazine called Lucifer's Trust, which is still in existence, by the way. And
Yes.
the teaching is that Lucifer, in fact, is the light bearer. He's the rightful God of the universe. And Adonai, the God of the Christians, is the one that's evil, which that expression is mirrored very clearly by Albert Pike, who's one of the founding fathers of the American Masonic Order. But they are extremely hidden. Actually, before you get to Luciferian level, you get to what's called the Illuminati. And
Before you get to that?
Yes. Yeah, the Illuminati is underneath the Luciferian world. And
Wow.
yeah, and they're the ones for years people like, conspiracy theory didn't happen. Then you had people like Kanye West and Jay-Z and Beyonce coming out and letting us know they are committed to it. And I vetted it out through people who actually work in Hollywood in the music industry. One particularly young person who wrote songs for about Britney Spears and Jay-Z and Beyonce. And he said there wasn't a single recording that he was present at where they weren't doing some sort of ritual, and that they would have these people. He said, "You've heard of the Men in Black." I said, "Of course." He said, "Well, we had the Men in White. These were the guys that came in white suits, and they had hundreds of thousands of dollars to just throw out for whatever project they wanted." That's the Luciferian world. Well, that's the Illuminati world, I should say. That's the ones that allow themselves to be seen visibly a little bit. And people like Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kanye West was a real heartbreak. It's real. They make a commitment. They get the drugs and the women and or whatever they want, but they have to stay in. And I remember when Kanye West came out and said, "I'm trying to get out of this." This was during the first Trump term. He made a video and said, "I'm trying to get out away from them, but they're going to kill my mother if I do." Well, his mother died shortly after that. And then Kanye went on what we call the Luciferian pendulum swing, because when you join that, you are held together by demonic forces. And when they remove those, you fragment. So all of a sudden, Kanye went from Luciferian. Next thing you know, he's doing Christian concerts and having thousands of Christians show up to his concert. And I thought, that's great if it's real, but this could be part of the pendulum swing. Next thing you know, I'm seeing him dressed in white. Everybody's dressed in white. And he's on stage with Justin Bieber and Marilyn Manson, and they are praying together. I'm like, he's on the other end of the pendulum swing. I knew it was just a matter of time. And sure enough, the next thing you know, he's doing podcasts where he's going anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. And now he's bought up some pornographic websites. Well, that's what happens when you betray your oath if you haven't committed to Jesus Christ. It's a tough way out. But above that are the Luciferians. And the law of the Luciferian, there's two laws. One is the guarantee of our tomorrow is today's perception that we do not exist. So we'll never know who these people really are, but they're the real world shakers and players. And their other expression is universo non deficit alter, which means when one head is cut off, the other will succeed. So some people in that world, they will die and no one will ever know that they've been this huge leader. And I think just this Christmas, there was a change that happened because I was working so hard on getting my book done to answer all of this stuff about this being a, satanic panic and everything. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting sent all of these news broadcasts from around the world from people who are saying, okay, let's revisit the satanic panic era and let's go again. And so people understand that none of those things were real. I'm like, why now? After 35 years, they already made their point. They already buried all of us under the rubble. Why are they doing this now? And then I learned that December, that one of the top people in the occult world, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, had passed away.
Oh, he was awful.
I thought this is the changing of the guard. Somebody else has taken place. And now they're making decisions on how to write the narrative so that nobody ever pursues them. So, yeah.
And this was last December, 2023?
Yes, 2023.
Wow. Well, there's so much evil. And Zach has a couple other questions, and Zach will get to it. But before I forget, I want to ask, along these lines, when you get to that level of the white suits, are they demonically possessed? I can't imagine people doing so much wickedness and evil and not actually being possessed by the enemy, by Satan.
I would have to say largely that's true. To what degree of possession, I don't know. Usually when complete possession takes over, people end up in mental institutions or killing themselves. So I think there's a controlled amount of possession that takes place that makes them functional as human beings, but they've nearly been erased as human beings. And that's why sometimes in dealing with people and trying to extract these things, we have to have at least some part of the person present and able to communicate in order to really succeed in dealing with those things. So I would say you don't reach that level of debauchery without getting some form of possession.
Wow. Okay, let's get to Zach. I'm going to post his comment here. He's going to, he was going back to the children that are missing and wants to know if there's a way to get some of those children back.
I think there is. I've known people who have been able to extract kids from that world. And I know in Zach's next question, he's asking how to save them in an ethical way without looking like a kidnapper and getting them back to their families. In the off chance that the families are even findable or want them back, it's important to know a few people in law enforcement that you can trust, that they will get on the information you gave them right away and help to do that in a way that's legal. It becomes difficult, let's say if it's a 13 or 14-year-old boy or girl. Part of the problem we've had is they usually get injected back into the Child Protective Services, which across the country has been notorious for human
Mm.
trafficking. I would not trust them. I've known a couple of people that have been in there, and their lives are hell just trying to do what they do, but they're
Mhm.
notorious for human trafficking. And so we have to find enough safety net for the person, the child, that we're pretty sure that they're going to go to a safe environment if they can't be able to be sent back to their parents.
A
I know
lot of
one
these.
mother that, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that one of the parents, she's been looking for her son, I think since 1981, Johnny Gosh. He was the reason we had the milk cartons with the missing child poster, because he was kidnapped at the age of 11, I think. Maybe he was 13. He was a newspaper boy, and he was kidnapped and never found. We did find out later that he became part of a group out of Nebraska that was a pedophile group, and he had been kidnapped for that purpose. And this particular case involved a banker who ran the group, and this banker he sang at the 1984 and the 1987, I think, Republican National Conventions. He sang the Pledge of Allegiance. All the while he was bringing small planes into the Dallas-Fort Worth airport filled with children to be traded to the senators and the Congress people and the people with money in the back South Fork after parties of the Republican Party. And believe me,
Wow.
it's not just the Republican Party. But that's the whole thing when it deals with child trading. You know, we went through the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing where people became aware that people were actually doing these things. I knew the minute he got arrested, he'd be suicided. He was his partner in crime. They couldn't find her until they found her at I think, a In-N-Out Burger in California. She was outside. Her hair was all disheveled and stuff. And she was reading a book that you could actually see the name of the book. And it was a book that was written to celebrate the heroes of the CIA. And I thought, okay, I see. You're either part of them or you're reaching out to make a deal, one or the other. Because Jeffrey Epstein bragged about being part of Quantico and being part of, the Langley and the CIA, and nobody believed him.
Mhm.
But I thought, yeah, he was probably connected, because what these three-letter agencies do is they are able to use somebody like Epstein and compromise somebody and get
Mhm.
it on film or get
Mhm.
evidence of it. That goes into their vaults. And if, Senator, blah, blah is
Mhm.
not doing what we want, then we call them and say, you do what we tell you or this goes public. And so that's that level. And so now we've got the whole thing with P. Diddy and him being exposed. And now I'm sure the government's got copies of all the tapes were made. I think people in Hollywood are scrambling to make deals right now, because so many people, including people like T.D. Jakes, the great evangelist, showing
There's
up
going
at
to be
corporate
some
parties.
pastors that are going to fall hard
Absolutely. And
in all
and
of this.
thank God, because for too long this stuff has been hidden. And so, yeah, so there just needs to be a lot of help somehow
Mhm.
for the victims trying to get out of this world. It's not an easy route for them.
No, it's not. And then as you can see, Zach has one more just kind of comment that there are families that are generational Satanists and they sell their children. Um, I think Kathy O'Brien was actually sold. She's become very high profile lately, and she explains how difficult it is to grow up in these atmospheres where you are abused. Something's not right, but as a child, just like you explained earlier, you're in pain all the time, and you don't know any different, but when you're being called on to go from one place to another, that it's not going to be fun, but it's a hopeless situation feeling for these children, because they just don't know what else to do.
And it's painful to know that happens. Um, and to Zach, not only did the generational Satanists sell their children, but we were dealing with one little town in New Mexico where parents would sell their kid for like $50 for a hit of meth. because they didn't
Oh,
really want the kid anyway. And they
wow.
just sell them for $50, $100. And it's very painful.
Well, we know that there are signs, what to look for. You're right. There have been many whistleblowers coming out in the last, 3.5 years of from the Health and Human Services, the CPS, and they're saying, they're trying to process children and do it faithfully, but they're finding that these children are being sent to, hundreds of children are sent to the same address.
Yeah.
And this has really exploded in the last 3.5 years with the open borders. And
That has
that's
been a
just a fact.
disaster.
It's not political. It is a
It's
fact.
not. And I'm on the border, and we saw it. And we
Yes.
saw the people coming over, and we saw the children being separated from their parents or not, because a lot of the kids, they were just put with a random adult who said it was an uncle or a parent, brought over the border. And I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this or not, but in for a penny, in for a pound, right?
We'll get kicked off of YouTube, but that's
Ooh, I'm so scared. But I think from
answer.
my intel says that they actually were taking the families that came through. And we have underground tunnels in the city that took them 20 miles outside of town and kept them there in abandoned Minuteman missile silos that I didn't even know were out there. And that's where they would separate the children from the adults, and the children would be sent off into the sex trade industry.
Yeah.
The difficulty for us in getting help, as I think can be just about anywhere, is that I've run into 3 different situations of human trafficking live that were happening, and I watched it. And I learned that there's, like, at least here, there's something you want to watch for it, because kids will come into a restaurant and they will have a little bag or a basket of candy bars and saying, I'm raising money for my sports team for school or for my school. And sometimes that's legit, but it's legit if you look at the candy bar and it's got the name of the school. So I always ask when that happens, honey, what school are you with? And if they flatline and turn around and walk away, I know they're being trafficked. And I've seen 2 or 3 of these, and one of them, we followed them for nearly a half an hour. They always had the same MO. They had black SUVs, brand new, had other kids in the SUV, and then they would just take off. And this particular one went through a whole strip mall and would drop the kids off, go in, and then they come out and pick them up again. And we tagged them, and I'm very careful about that, because if you've got that happening, you've got a spotter car that's looking for whoever's looking at them. So you want to make sure you don't get in their periphery. And so I did that, took down the tags. I called 911 twice. Police are coming, don't worry. Nobody ever showed up. I was so angry. I finally talked to a friend of mine in ICE, and he says, brother, I hate to tell you, but they're not going to come. Police aren't going to help you. First of all, most of the police in your city don't care. And the ones that don't care, it almost doesn't matter, because they'll arrest the pimp, arrest the children, take the children, send them back across the border. And the next morning, somebody will come in with a couple $100,000 and bail the pimp out, and they're back on the streets the next day. So they just realize it's a losing battle. But at least to recognize some of those things when a child's being trafficked and take the risk, call somebody.
Yeah. And there are safe houses in cities that are ministries that do rescue children like this, and they will try to find their homes, where they're from, and put them in a safe house, a Christian environment, until they can find either their parents or family members, or if they can't, then they just kind of move them into, I guess, adopted families, or if they're older, and help them get their school, finish school, but they do help. There are ministries who are equipped to do that, which gives me a lot of hope. And those are ministries that are worth funding. So if you can find them, fund them.
And if you can find one that, unfortunately, according to some friends I know in that work in the rescue, they said there's literally 0 homes for trafficked boys or young men. And that's a real deficit because
Mm-hmm.
those are the hardest to find, the hardest to rescue, and the hardest to heal. And so we need to keep that in prayer, that God would raise up those groups that could also incorporate them as part of the healing process, as part of the rescue. There's a lot of work to do, but we can't give up, because Malachi, I think, I want to say 6:6, if I get it right. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And I remember in the early stages of my ministry, one of my mentors was a lady named Amy Carmichael, who ran a rescue mission in India for little girls who were being prostituted and sold to Hindu temples at the age of 6 and 7 years old.
Wow.
Horrible things done to them. And she talked about it, and she said they would do whatever they had to steal them, to buy them, to rescue them. And she said, surely the gospel includes this too. And I said, yes. And so when we began to work in this field, and she used to write a newsletter, which I modeled mine after. It's called Things as They Are, because she said, I'm writing about things as they are, not things as you would like them to be.
Right.
Because her ministry agency, the missionary, was saying, why don't you write some good stories, some encouraging stories? And she said, I could do that. I could paint a pretty picture, but it's not the whole picture. As a matter of fact, the newsletters of Amy Carmichael, I think the book is called Things as They Are. I recommend it for anybody that's going into ministry or hard ministries, because she showed what they had to go through to rescue some of these children. But again, surely the gospel includes this, and we need to let God break our heart for these things and ask him to send laborers into the field.
Amen. Wow, what a great way to end. So we know, we've been educated on that there are things that are going on. We need to keep our eyes open. We need to be careful how we celebrate these pagan holidays. And Greg, before we run out of time, can you tell people where they can get your book and how they can find you and listen to your podcast?
Absolutely. The website is www.gregoryreid.com. The podcast is called Extreme Times, Truth in the Shadowlands, and you can get it at about any podcast, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, whatever, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find it there. 2 books to 3 that I think are essential. I think I've written 13. All of them can be found on Amazon. There's actually 4 that are, I think, important. One is called Nobody's Angel. That's my story. One is called The Color of Pain, which is written specifically for parents and for male survivors of sexual and ritual abuse. Third one is War of the Ages, which is like a manual on deliverance. And this new one, Diary of a Devil Hunter, this is the most difficult book I've ever read. But if you really want to know what this world's about, just go on Amazon and pick it up.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming and talking to us. I know sometimes some things are hard to talk about, but God sees all of this. Amen. And so we can't shy away from it if we're going to have a heart that helps those who God sees are just in very dire situations.
Amen. As a friend said one time to me, if it's hard for us to hear, you can imagine how hard it is for the children to endure. So God help us to keep our hearts centered on that, so that we can do what we're called to do.
I agree. Everyone, stay safe out there. Keep praying and to know God. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.